What's up, everybody? Whiskey in the Six, I'm Rob. So, this is the rare time where I will review a sample, and the only reason I'm reviewing a sample is I've tried this whiskey, which is the Canadian Club 41-year-old, several times now. I was invited to an awesome event hosted by Praxis. So, I was flown to Windsor. We went to an awesome tour of the old CC mansion where Al Capone had several meetings, where Hiram Walker first set up shop and turned CC into what it would become today. Then we went for lunch, got to sample the CC 41-year-old, had a couple drams of it there. From there we moved to the warehouse where we got to do 100% barrel pulls of the actual 41-year-old liquid.
He's a pro. Ooh. And he's thirsty.
At cast strength, which was incredible. The liquid was around 62% in the barrel, which I was absolutely shocked because when I was drinking it, it felt like it was no more than 46. I'm not even exaggerating. It was just beautiful liquid, and I really hope that one day they release the barrel proof version, maybe for the 42, 43, 44, or 45-year-old, which they do plan on doing every year from now till it turns 45, and then eventually they're gonna skip up to 50. So it's gonna be very interesting. CC has a lot of really cool stuff planned for their brand. So I want to give a big thank you to, first of all, Meredith from Praxis, Rob from Canadian Club, who were incredible hosts and just incredible people and really, really great to talk to. I had a pleasure meeting them. I got to meet some other cool people like Blair, who writes for Whiskey Magazine, and honestly it was just a really cool experience overall. Really happy to have taken part in it, and honestly I really enjoy this stuff. It embraces one of Canada's rules, which is for Canadian whiskey you can have 9.09% of any other liquid that contains alcohol. So 9.09% of this whiskey is rye, cognac, and sherry, and I'm not sure the exact portions or anything like that, but over 90% of this is 100% corn that's aged for 41 years. So I know for a fact that if I tasted this side by side with last year's version, I would pick this one as what my palate prefers. The reason for that is this one's a little bit more viscous. It's got a creaminess to it that last year's didn't have as much of, and there's some sweet elements to this that last year didn't have. I'm gonna nose and taste it, give it a mark. I know that CC, or I feel that CC might get some pushback as to why they included different spirits or wine in this particular expression. What I can say is this: as whiskey consumers, as spirit consumers in 2018, there's never been a bigger outcry for transparency. When I spoke with Rob from CC, when I spoke with some people at the CC event that I went to, they were very forthright and honest about what's inside this whiskey. So they had no qualms about explaining that there was the addition of sherry, cognac, and rye. And for that reason, I cannot judge them negatively for that. I think that I'm seeking transparency as a whiskey drinker, and if they're willing to be honest about what's inside, then they're letting people choose for themselves, and that's the most important thing. When a company pulls the wool over the consumer's eyes, that leaves a bad taste in our mouths. There are other companies, which I will leave nameless, that have done that exact thing with what we thought were very old expressions. And we're talking about Canadian whiskeys. So these guys are embracing Canada's rules. They're being very honest about Canada's rules. They're being very honest about what they did to this particular whiskey. I truly believe, which might not be what other people want to hear, that it has been improved by those slight blending elements. On the nose, you get almost like a bourbon-like quality, like a nicely aged bourbon. It kind of it takes me back to when I tasted and smelled the Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old. Those corn elements really sink through. You get caramel, almost like a butterscotch fudgy note. You get like a grape element, which is really kind of neat. A chocolatey note in there. And it's kind of all over the place. There is a spiciness from what can only be described as rye. And I know that they age that corn in rye barrels, but I do believe that there's a slight inclusion of rye. I could be wrong about that. I know that there's an inclusion of cognac and sherry. So the barrels used for the 100% corn whiskey was previously rye. So once used rye barrels. There's a burnt element, almost like a charred oak element coming from the nose that I love. Almost like a burnt marshmallow. On the palate, creamy. That burnt marshmallow carries through. Fudgy notes. There's no burn, but it doesn't taste overly watered down. The nose is definitely the winner on this one. Honestly, Canadian whiskey lovers are gonna absolutely adore this. I know that the rest of the world is gonna kind of look at it and think negatively about the 9.09% rule. The only thing I can say is reiterate what I said earlier. We're looking for transparency, we're looking for quality, and we're looking for the whiskey to speak for itself. Or at least the spirit, the liquid, to speak for itself. And I think this does that. It's really good stuff. It's gonna be about $300 at the LCBO. I don't know what it's gonna cost in the rest of Canada. Some places probably a little bit less. Some places probably a little bit more. I know that there's gonna be 12,000 bottles in Canada, 800 bottles going to the US and 800 going to Europe, I believe. So 13,600 bottles total. Pretty collectible, in my opinion. I think it's still gonna go really fast, and I think you're gonna want to try this one. If you were lucky enough to watch my live the other night, you probably signed up for the free event where they're going to be releasing this whiskey, and you're going to get a chance to try it for yourself and make your decision based on that taste, and I think you're going to really like this one. One more taste and I'm going to give it a mark. So, as an overall spirit, I've marked cognacs before, I've marked rums before, I've marked various types of whiskey before. As an overall spirit that's predominantly aged for 41 years, I have to give this an 89. It's really nice stuff. The 9.09% rule has continuously been an issue for me in the past, but mainly because it's always been a hidden rule. It's always been a company that claims to have 35-year-old whiskey, but then adds 14-year-old rye into their whiskey. Or a company that claims to have 20-year-old whiskey, but then adds 5-year-old whiskey into it. Those things are never disclosed. Those things are usually under the rug, and that's not what CC is doing. They're being very transparent about what's inside here. They're following the rules of what they're allowed to do, and they're embracing it and saying, this is Canada, we're allowed to be a little bit more creative using that 9.09% rule. And they're taking the bull by the horns and using that opportunity. And you know what? All the power to them. They're gonna get some pushback. They're gonna get some people that refuse to buy it because of that rule. If you're a Canadian whiskey fan, be careful before you start to boycott stuff like that, because what ends up happening is the stuff that you don't know about, you're probably already in love with. So this is really good stuff. I enjoy it a lot. I think that's an 89. That barrel pull that I had was probably one of the best whiskeys I've ever had in my life. So I'm really hoping that they release that at Barrel Proof, because it was phenomenal. You guys all know how I feel about barrel proof whiskey, and honestly, it was one of the best whiskeys I've ever had. Definitely the best Canadian whiskey I ever had. Coming out of that barrel at 62%, drank like it was, like I said, 46%. I'm curious to see what you guys are gonna think. Hopefully, I'll get to experience that firsthand at the event. You guys can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You guys can also check me out on Patreon to support the channel. Cheers.